The notification chimed softly against the hum of my laptop fan, barely audible over the rain pattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Mission Bay apartment. I was deep in the final slides of my keynote presentation for the International AI Ethics Summit, 3 days of work condensed into 20 minutes that could define my career. The cursor blinked expectantly after a bullet point about algorithmic transparency when my phone buzzed again. "Ethan?" I smiled without looking, assuming he was checking in about dinner plans or reminding me about his client call with the Singapore team. We'd been ships passing in the night lately, both buried in our respective projects, but that was the rhythm of our work. 6 years of marriage had taught us to weather these intense periods. The third buzz made me glance down, before we jumped back in. "Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I think we should separate. I've moved out. I'll have my attorney contact you." I read it once, twice. The words didn't rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My hands went cold, the kind of cold that starts in your fingertips and spreads inward until it reaches something vital. "We need to talk," I said aloud to the empty apartment, my voice unnervingly steady as I hit his contact. Straight to voicemail, his professional voice, crisp and confident. "You've reached Ethan Caldwell. Please leave a detailed message." I hung up without speaking. The presentation slides blurred on my screen. Ethical frameworks for AI governance. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, preparing to lecture hundreds of tech leaders about moral responsibility while my husband had just blown up our life by a text message with all the consideration of canceling a dentist appointment. I tried calling again. Voicemail. The apartment suddenly felt enormous, all clean lines and expensive minimalism. We'd chosen everything together: the Danish furniture, the abstract art, the kitchen island where we'd spent countless Sunday mornings reading the Times and debating ethics cases over coffee. Now it felt like a museum exhibit, The Life of Jade and Ethan Caldwell, 2018-2024. My laptop chimed with an email notification. For a wild moment, I thought it might be Ethan explaining, apologizing, telling me the text was some kind of mistake or hack. Instead, it was from our company's IT security team. "Your access to Monroe Caldwell Consulting Systems has been suspended pending administrative review. Please contact HR for questions." Administrative review. The company we'd built together. The firm that bore both our names. The consultancy we'd launched in our second year of marriage when we were still drunk on the possibility of changing the world through ethical technology. He'd locked me out. I scrolled through my phone, looking for missed calls, earlier texts. Some breadcrumb trail that might explain how we'd gotten from "good luck with your presentation, babe, yesterday morning" to this scorched earth departure. There was nothing. My hands shook as I opened our banking app. Our joint checking account showed a balance of $247.83. Yesterday it had been $12,000. Our savings account, the one we'd been building toward a house down payment, was frozen, requiring both signatures for any transactions. Signature pending. Ethan Caldwell. The methodical cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't impulse. This was strategy. While I'd been buried in presentation prep for a career-defining moment, Ethan had been systematically erasing me from our shared life. I walked to our bedroom, my bedroom now, I supposed, and pulled open his closet. Empty hangers swayed like accusations. His Tom Ford suits gone. The Hermes tie I'd given him for our anniversary gone. Even his cologne had been cleared from the bathroom counter. But he'd left things too. Little cruelties disguised as oversights. Our wedding photo still sat on his nightstand, but face down. His Northwestern alumni magazine remained on his desk, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Caldwell, a name I'd never taken but that his mother had insisted on using anyway. My phone rang, and I lunged for it. "Amira, thank God, Jade. What's wrong?" "You sound..." Ethan left me. The words came out in a rush, via text. He cleaned out our accounts and locked me out of the company systems, and I don't understand what's happening. Silence on the other end. Amira Das had been my best friend since Berkeley, my maid of honor, the lawyer who'd helped us draft the original partnership agreements for Monroe Caldwell. If anyone could make sense of this, it was her. "I'm coming over," she said finally. "Don't touch anything. Don't sign anything. Don't call him again. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I spent those 20 minutes wandering our apartment like a ghost, seeing it with new eyes. The expensive espresso machine Ethan had insisted on gone, but he'd left the cheap French press I preferred, probably figuring I'd need caffeine for the devastation ahead. The Chihili glass sculpture from our anniversary trip to Seattle's still here, but moved to a less prominent shelf. The Persian rug his mother had given us rolled up and stacked by the door like refuse. Everything beautiful we'd chosen together remained. Everything valuable and portable had vanished. Amira arrived in full lawyer mode, her black hair pulled into a severe bun, designer briefcase in hand, wearing the expression she reserved for particularly despicable opposing counsel. "Show me everything," she said without preamble. I walked her through the text, the frozen accounts, the suspended access. She took notes in her precise handwriting, asking sharp questions about timing, documentation, shared assets. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with something between fury and pity. "Jade, this is calculated. Nobody moves this fast or this thoroughly without planning. How long has he been different?" I thought about it, really thought. "The Singapore deal," I said slowly. "The biotech contract. He's been working crazy hours, taking calls at odd times. But I assumed it was just the project. When did that start? 3 months ago? Maybe 4. Amira's expression darkened. "He's been planning this for months. The question is why now, and why like this?" As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with another text from Ethan. "This doesn't have to be adversarial. I'm trying to make this clean for both of us." Clean. As if 6 years of marriage could be dissolved with the same efficiency as a bad business partnership. "Don't respond," Amira said, reading over my shoulder. "And we need to talk about the company. What does your partnership agreement say about dissolution?" I pulled up the documents on my laptop, the ones I could still access from my personal drive. As I scrolled through pages of legal language, something caught my eye. A folder I didn't recognize, buried in my archive files. "What's that?" Amira asked, noting my pause. I clicked it open. Financial records, email threads, compliance reports, all from the Singapore biotech deal Ethan had been working on. The deal I'd had minimal involvement in, despite it being our biggest contract to date. "I don't remember saving these," I said, scanning the documents. "But look at this." The emails painted a troubling picture. Algorithmic bias in healthcare AI that had been identified and then quietly buried. Test results showing discriminatory outcomes for women and minorities that had been excluded from final reports. Regulatory submissions that told a very different story from the internal memos. "Jade," Amira said quietly, reading over my shoulder. "This is fraud. SEC-level fraud." I stared at the screen, my personal devastation suddenly intersecting with something larger and more dangerous. Ethan hadn't just been hiding an affair or financial impropriety. He'd been hiding systemic corruption that could harm thousands of patients who relied on these AI diagnostic tools. "He must have backed these up to my drive by accident," I said. "Probably when he was working from home. Shared folders, cloud sync, or maybe," Amira said carefully, "some part of him wanted someone to find them." Guilt does funny things to people. I thought about the man I'd married. The one who'd cried when we watched documentaries about social justice. The one who'd insisted we donate 10% of our income to causes we believed in. When had that person been replaced by someone who could bury evidence of algorithmic bias that would disproportionately harm vulnerable populations? "What do I do with this?" I asked. Amira was quiet for a long moment. "That depends. How badly did he hurt you? And how badly do you want to hurt him back?" I looked around our apartment, his apartment now. Since my name had been carefully kept off the lease, I thought about the presentation I was supposed to give in 3 days, the one I'd have to deliver alone while processing public humiliation. I thought about starting over at 32, with no access to the company I'd helped build and no clear path forward. But mostly I thought about the patients who would receive biased diagnoses because my husband had prioritized profit over truth. "I want him to face consequences," I said. "Not just for what he did to me, for what he's doing to people who trust these systems." Amira nodded slowly. "Then we need to be very, very careful about how we proceed, because once you light this fuse, there's no going back." I saved the files to an encrypted drive, my hands steadier than they'd been all evening. Ethan thought he'd discarded the safe choice, the grateful wife who would accept whatever terms he offered. He had no idea he'd just activated the one person who knew where all his bodies were buried. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Ethan. "Can we talk before you make any rash decisions?" I smiled for the first time in hours and deleted the message without reading it twice. Rash decisions were his specialty. Strategic ones were mine. The next morning arrived gray and relentless, San Francisco fog pressing against the windows like an accusation. I'd spent the night on the couch, unable to face our bedroom, surrounded by printouts of Ethan's files and 3 empty coffee cups. Amira had left at midnight with a promise to review partnership law and return with options. I'd been awake since 4, methodically working through the digital breadcrumbs Ethan had left behind. What I'd initially dismissed as accidental file sharing now looked more deliberate, a careful trail of evidence that painted a picture of systematic deception. The Singapore biotech deal wasn't just ethically questionable, it was criminal. My laptop hummed as I opened another encrypted folder, this one containing email threads between Ethan and Dr. Marcus Chen, CTO of Helix Dynamics. The subject lines alone made my stomach turn: revised bias metrics final, regulatory submission, strategy, minority cohort exclusion rationale. From Ethan Caldwell to Marcus Chen. Subject Ray, FDA submission timeline Marcus, we need to discuss the diagnostic accuracy discrepancies before the submission deadline. The algorithm shows a 23% higher false negative rate for Black women with cardiac symptoms. Legal suggests we categorize this as population-specific calibration needs rather than bias. Can you adjust the training data documentation to reflect this framing? I know it's not ideal, but we're looking at a $50 million contract extension if we can get through phase 2 approval. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. 23%. That wasn't a statistical quirk or calibration issue. That was a death sentence for women who would be sent home from emergency rooms because an AI system had been trained to dismiss their symptoms. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Cameron. Cameron Torres, from the office. Can we talk? Cameron, the 24-year-old PR coordinator with the Columbia journalism degree and the Instagram-ready smile. The one who'd started staying late when Ethan did. The one who'd accompanied him to the Singapore client dinner last month while I was speaking at a conference in Portland. I deleted the message without responding and returned to the files. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. Helix Dynamics had been struggling with algorithmic bias in their diagnostic AI for 2 years. Instead of fixing the underlying issues, they'd hired Monroe Caldwell to help them navigate regulatory approval despite the problems. Ethan had systematically coached them through strategies to minimize, hide, or reframe the bias as acceptable trade-offs. Every compromise principle had a dollar amount attached. Every buried report had a contract extension behind it. My father had been a philosophy professor at Oakland Community College, the kind of man who'd rather take the bus than drive a car that hurt the environment. He'd raised me to believe that integrity wasn't negotiable, that some things mattered more than profit. I'd thought I'd married someone who shared those values. Instead, I'd been living with a stranger who'd learned to mimic my language while building a career on the opposite principles. I opened a new browser window and searched for SEC whistleblower attorney San Francisco. The first result was a law firm specializing in corporate fraud cases. The second was an article about a former compliance officer who'd built a practice around protecting people who reported financial crimes. Victor Chang, partner, Chang and Associates. Most people think whistleblowing is about revenge. It's actually about justice. I created a new email account using a VPN and drafted a message.mr. Chang, I have evidence of systematic fraud in AI regulatory submissions by a major consulting firm. The fraud involves hiding algorithmic bias that could harm patients. I'd like to discuss this confidentially. G stared at the draft for 10 minutes before hitting send. Once that email left my outbox, I would officially become the kind of person who reported their own husband to federal authorities, a wife who chose strangers over loyalty, a woman who burned bridges instead of building them. My phone rang. Amira, I've been up all night reading partnership law, she said without preamble. The good news is that Ethan can't unilaterally remove you from the company. The bad news is that he can make your life hell until you agree to dissolve voluntarily. What kind of hell? Frozen operating accounts, suspended vendor relationships, locked email systems. He's basically counting on you being too financially stressed to fight back. I walked to the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee, my 4th of the morning. What if I had other resources? What do you mean? What if I didn't need access to company accounts to survive? What if I could outlast him? Amira was quiet for a moment. Jade, is there something you haven't told me about your finances? I'd never told anyone about my father's life insurance policy, not even Ethan. When Dad died 3 years ago, I'd assumed The payout would be modest, maybe enough to cover funeral expenses and help my mom with bills. Instead, I'd discovered that my father, the community college professor who'd worn the same jacket for 15 years, had been quietly maintaining a substantial life insurance policy since I was born. My father left me money, I said finally. Enough to be independent for a while. How much money? Enough to hire you. Enough to fight back. Enough to not care about his threats. The line went quiet. Jesus, Jade, you've been sitting on financial independence this whole time? I never needed it before. Ethan and I were building something together. Or so I thought. Well, you need it now. And if you're serious about fighting back, I have ideas. An hour later, Amir arrived with a file folder and a grim expression. We spread documents across the dining table: partnership agreements, incorporation papers, intellectual property assignments. Here's what I think happened, she said, pointing to a clause buried in page 12 of our original agreement. Ethan assumed you'd be financially dependent enough to accept whatever settlement he offered. He probably figured you'd take a modest payout and disappear quietly. Instead, you can afford to fight. And if you're really sitting on the kind of evidence you showed me last night, you have leverage he never saw coming. My laptop chimed with an email notification. A response from Victor Chang. Jay, I'm interested in learning more. Can you meet today? I have a secure office in the financial district. No commitment, just a conversation. VCI showed Amira the message. She nodded slowly. Do it. But before you do, we need to talk about what you're really trying to accomplish here. Because once you cross this line, there's no going back to being Mrs. Ethan Caldwell. I thought about the cardiac diagnostic algorithm that would dismiss black women's symptoms 23% more often than white men's. I thought about the patients who would die because my husband had prioritized contract extensions over human lives. I thought about the 6 years I'd spent believing I was married to someone who shared my values. I stopped being Mrs. Ethan Caldwell the moment he sent that text, I said. Now I want to be the woman who stopped him from hurting people. Amira smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since this started. Then let's go destroy your husband's career. I spent the afternoon preparing for my meeting with Victor Chang. I printed every damaging email, every buried report, every piece of evidence that showed the systematic nature of Ethan's fraud. By the time I finished, I had a 3-inch stack of documents that could dismantle not just Ethan's career, but potentially send him to federal prison. My hands were steady as I loaded everything into a secure briefcase. This wasn't revenge, I told myself. This was justice. This was protecting future patients from biased algorithms. This was doing what my father would have wanted me to do. But as I dressed for the meeting, choosing the navy suit I'd worn to our wedding reception, the one Ethan had said made me look formidable, I couldn't deny the darker satisfaction burning in my chest. He'd discarded me like I was disposable. Now he was about to learn exactly how dangerous a discarded woman could be. My phone buzzed with another text from Cameron. Please, I know you hate me, but I need to tell you something about Ethan. Something important. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, tomorrow, PM Cafe Reveille on 4th Street. Come alone. If I was going to destroy Ethan's life, I wanted to understand all the pieces first, including the girl who'd helped him detonate mine. The late afternoon sun broke through the fog as I walked toward the financial district, briefcase in hand, evidence of my husband's crimes tucked safely inside. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like myself again, not the abandoned wife, not the discarded partner, but the woman who'd built her career on holding powerful people accountable for their choices. Ethan had taught me that marriage was a partnership where both people's interests mattered. He'd just forgotten to mention that the lesson would work both ways. Victor Chang's office occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower that scraped the San Francisco sky. The elevator ride up felt like ascending toward judgment, though. Whether it was mine or Ethan's remained to be seen. As the doors opened, I clutched my briefcase tighter and stepped into the hallway. Behind me, the city spread out like a circuit board, all gleaming connections and hidden currents. Ahead of me waited a conversation that would determine whether I remained a victim of my husband's betrayal or became the architect of his downfall. I'd spent 6 years believing love meant loyalty at any cost. Now I was about to discover what justice looked like when love was no longer part of the equation. Victor Chang's office felt like a sanctuary designed for difficult truths. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the bay, while the interior remained deliberately understated. No expensive art or status symbols, just clean lines and the kind of furniture that suggested serious work happened here. Victor himself was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'8", with graying temples and the careful posture of someone who'd learned to command respect through competence rather than presence. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but brief, professional without being cold. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing toward a conference table. "I've reviewed the materials you sent. They're substantial." I set my briefcase on the table, but didn't open it yet. "How substantial?" "Potentially criminal. Definitely actionable under SEC regulations. The question is whether you're prepared for what happens next." He poured water from a glass pitcher into 2 tumblers, the sound crystalline in the quiet office. "Whistleblower cases aren't just about evidence, Miss Monroe. They're about endurance. Your husband's soon-to-be ex-husband will have expensive lawyers, powerful friends, and every incentive to make your life complicated. He's already made my life complicated." Victor's expression softened slightly. "I've been doing this for 12 years. I've seen brilliant people with ironclad cases walk away because they underestimated the personal cost of fighting institutional power. Are you certain this is about justice rather than revenge?" I opened my briefcase and withdrew the stack of documents I'd organized the night before. "This is about 23% higher false negative rates for Black women with cardiac symptoms. This is about diagnostic algorithms that will kill people because my husband helped bury the evidence of bias, and if pursuing this case means destroying your own reputation, your career, your financial security. My career is built on ethical AI development. If I don't fight this, I don't deserve to have that career." Victor nodded slowly, then reached for the documents. For the next hour, we went through everything systematically: emails, financial records, regulatory submissions, internal memos. He asked sharp questions about dates, relationships, documentation chains. His experience showed in the way he immediately identified the most damaging evidence and the weakest links in the case. "This is prosecutable," he said. Finally, "multiple federal violations, securities fraud, certainly. Potentially conspiracy charges if we can prove coordination with Helix Dynamics executives." "What's the timeline?" 6 months minimum for a formal investigation. 18 months if it goes to trial. During that time, you'll be unemployable in most of Silicon Valley. Your name will be associated with this case in every Google search for the next decade. I thought about the AI Ethics Summit I was supposed to speak at tomorrow. The keynote I'd prepared on algorithmic transparency and corporate responsibility. The irony was almost perfect. I'd be giving a presentation about the principles my husband had systematically violated. "I need to ask you something," I said. "I'm speaking at a conference tomorrow, the International AI Ethics Summit. Should I cancel?" Victor's eyebrows rose. "You're presenting at the summit? That's interesting timing. Why?" "Because half the tech ethics community will be there, including journalists, regulators, and probably some of the people who should be investigating companies like Helix Dynamics." He leaned back in his chair. "What's your presentation about?" "Algorithmic transparency, corporate accountability, and AI development." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "If you're going to proceed with the whistleblower case, that presentation could be very strategic. Establish your credibility as someone who cares about these issues. Show the community who you are before your husband's lawyers try to define you." "You think I should give the talk?" "I think you should give the best talk of your career." The Moscone Center buzzed with the controlled energy of a major tech conference. Hundreds of developers, ethicists, journalists, and executives moved through the lobby in expensive casual wear, clutching coffee and scanning badges with the aggressive networking enthusiasm I'd learned to navigate over 6 years in Silicon Valley. I'd arrived early to test my presentation setup, but mostly to avoid the possibility of running into Ethan. Our firm had sponsored this conference for 3 years running, and he'd planned to attend before everything. My presentation was scheduled for the main stage at 11 a.m., a 20-minute keynote on building ethical AI, from principles to practice. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd originally planned to use Monroe Caldwell's work as a case study of how consulting firms could champion ethical development. Now I'd be speaking as a woman whose husband had systematically violated every principle I planned to discuss. Jade Monroe. I turned to find a woman about my age approaching, with sharp features and the kind of confident stride that suggested journalism or academia. She extended a hand, Nora Alvarez, Tech Ethics Quarterly. I've been following your work on bias detection frameworks. Really looking forward to your talk this morning. Thank you. I'm honestly nervous about it. First time on the main stage? First time speaking solo, I said, which was true in more ways than she could know. Nora's expression shifted slightly, professionally curious. Solo? Wasn't Ethan Caldwell supposed to be co-presenting? I saw both your names on the original program. My chest tightened. Change of plans. He's dealing with some urgent client work. Ah, she nodded, but I caught something in her expression, the look of a journalist filing away an interesting discrepancy. Well, I'll be interested to hear your perspective on corporate accountability. My beat is investigating how tech companies handle ethics compliance, and let's just say there's a lot of room for improvement. Before I could respond, someone called my name from across the lobby. I turned to see Dr. Loretta Yamada, my former advisor from Berkeley, approaching with a warm smile. Jade, I was hoping to catch you before your presentation. Loretta had been one of the first women of color to hold an endowed chair in computer ethics at Berkeley, and she'd mentored me through my thesis on AI bias detection. I have to say, I'm particularly interested in hearing your thoughts on corporate accountability today. Why particularly today? Loretta's expression grew more serious. Because there are rumors floating around about some of the larger consulting firms. Questions about whether they're prioritizing client relationships over ethical obligations. I'm hoping you'll address that tension. I felt Nora's attention sharpen beside us. What kind of rumors? She asked. Nothing I can discuss specifically, Loretta said carefully. But let's just say there are concerns about how some firms are helping tech companies navigate regulatory approval despite known bias issues. My mouth went dry. Were people already talking about Helix Dynamics? About Monroe Caldwell? Or was this just the kind of general industry gossip that circulated at every conference? That's actually very relevant to my presentation. I managed. Good, Loretta said. Because if those rumors are true, we need people with credibility speaking out about it. An hour later, I stood backstage listening to my introduction, my hands steady, despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. Instead of the safe, theoretical presentation I'd originally planned, I'd spent the morning rewriting my keynote into something more personal, more pointed. Please welcome Dr. Jade Monroe, co-founder of Monroe Caldwell Consulting and a leading voice in AI ethics development. The applause felt distant as I walked onto the stage, facing an audience of several hundred people who represented the community I'd built my career in. The lights were bright enough that I couldn't make out individual faces beyond the first few rows, which was both relief and disappointment. Thank you, I said, waiting for the applause to die down. I want to start with a confession. When I originally planned this presentation, I was going to talk about ethical AI development in the abstract principles and frameworks and best practices. But over the past week, I've been forced to confront a more uncomfortable question. What happens when the people we trust to implement those principles fail us? I clicked to my first slide, a simple graph showing diagnostic accuracy rates across different demographic groups. This is data from a hypothetical cardiac diagnostic AI. Notice anything troubling? Murmurs from the audience as people process the 23% difference in false negative rates. Now imagine you're a consultant hired to help this company get regulatory approval. Imagine your client desperately wants to launch this product because there's $50 million on the table. What do? I click to the next slide, a flowchart showing ethical decision points. The answer should be obvious. You tell them to fix the bias before seeking approval. You insist on additional testing. You prioritize patient safety over profit. But what if you don't? What if you help them reframe the bias as population-specific calibration needs? What if you coach them through regulatory submissions that minimize or hide the disparities? The audience was completely quiet now, the kind of focused attention that meant I'd hit something important. What I'm describing isn't hypothetical, I continued. This kind of ethical failure is happening right now in our industry by people who should know better. And it's happening because we've created a system where consultants can profit from helping companies avoid accountability rather than embrace it. I spent the next 15 minutes walking through case studies, research, findings, and policy recommendations. But I also talked about personal responsibility, about the courage required to choose principles over profit, about what it meant to be worthy of the trust placed in AI developers. The future of ethical AI isn't just about better algorithms or Stricter regulations, I concluded. It's about whether we're willing to hold ourselves and each other accountable when we fall short. Because if we're not, we have no business asking the public to trust us with systems that affect their lives. The applause was sustained and warm, but I barely heard it. As the lights dimmed slightly, I could finally make out faces in the audience. Loretta was nodding approvingly. Nora was taking notes. And in the back corner, looking like he'd seen a ghost, stood Ethan. He must have slipped in during my presentation. His face was pale, his expensive suit somehow rumpled despite being perfectly tailored. Our eyes met across the auditorium, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Good. The post-presentation rush was a blur of handshakes, business cards, and intense conversations about corporate accountability in AI development. Multiple people mentioned wanting to follow up about specific cases they were investigating. Nora approached with additional questions about my research methodology. 2 venture capital partners asked about my consulting availability. Through it all, I kept one eye on the back of the room where Ethan had been standing. He'd disappeared sometime during the networking session, but his presence had shifted something in my chest. The abstract idea of fighting back had become suddenly, viscerally real. Jade. I turned to find Loretta beside me again, her expression thoughtful. That was powerful and brave. I hope you know what you're doing. What do you mean? I mean that when you speak truth to power that directly, power tends to push back. Are you prepared for that? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Now. Yeah, I showed the message to Loretta, who frowned. Don't respond, she said quietly. Whatever this is about, let it go through proper channels. Don't let him isolate you or control the narrative. But as I looked around the conference center at the journalists, the ethicists, the regulators who'd heard me speak about accountability, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't the abandoned wife hiding in her apartment anymore. I was Dr. Jade Monroe, and I'd just publicly declared war on exactly the kind of corruption my husband represented. Let him be afraid. Let him scramble. Let him realize that the woman he'd discarded via text message was about to become his biggest problem. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Victor Chang. Dr. Monroe, he said when I answered. I caught your presentation online. Interesting approach. Was it a mistake? On the contrary, you just established yourself as someone with principles and credibility. When we move forward with the case, that presentation will be exhibited that this is about ethics, not revenge. When we move forward, I received some very interesting calls this afternoon. It seems your presentation caught the attention of some people who've been investigating similar issues. Are you free to meet tomorrow? I think we should discuss accelerating our timeline. I looked around the conference center one more time, at the community I'd just declared myself to, the principles I'd publicly committed to defending. Yes, I said, let's accelerate everything. The next morning, I met Cameron Torres at Caf Reveille on 4th Street, choosing a corner table where we could speak without being overheard. She arrived 10 minutes late, wearing designer jeans and a nervous expression, her perfectly highlighted hair pulled into a messy bun that had probably taken 20 minutes to achieve. Thank you for coming, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. I wasn't sure you would. I studied her face, looking for signs of the calculating homewrecker I'd imagined. Instead, I saw someone young and scared, with the kind of wide-eyed anxiety that suggested she was in over her head. You said you had something important to tell me about Ethan. Cameron wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like it was an anchor. I need you to know that we never. She stopped, took a breath, started again. It's not what you think. What I think is that you're sleeping with my husband. No, her voice was firm. I'm not. I never have been. But Ethan, he's been telling people we are. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What do you mean? The Singapore trip, the late nights, the business dinners. He's been using me as cover, I guess, making it look like we're having an affair so people wouldn't look too closely at what he was really doing, which was. Cameron glanced around the caf, then leaned forward, meeting with lawyers and accountants and some woman from a headhunting firm in New York. He's been planning to leave Monroe Caldwell for months, maybe longer. Leave to go where? I don't know exactly, but I heard him on a call last week talking about Manhattan opportunities and legacy firm partnerships. He kept mentioning someone named Harrison. Marcus Harrison, I think. I knew that name. Marcus Harrison was a managing partner at Whitfield and Associates, one of the most prestigious consulting firms on the East Coast. The kind of place that specialized in helping Fortune 500 companies navigate regulatory challenges without getting their hands dirty. Cameron, why are you telling me this? She looked down at her coffee. Because I started recording our conversations. At first it was just, I wanted to protect myself. He'd been making comments about my performance, my attitude. I was worried. He was setting me up to be fired. But then I heard things that made me think. I think he's been planning this divorce for a long time. And I think there are other people involved. What kind of other people? Cameron pulled out her phone and showed me a voice memo app. Do you want to hear what he said about you yesterday, after your presentation? I nodded. Though my hands were shaking slightly, she hit play. Ethan's voice, tight with barely controlled anger. She thinks she's being clever, but she's just destroyed her own career. Nobody's going to hire the woman who publicly sabotaged her own firm. Marcus thinks we can use this to accelerate the timeline. If Jade wants to burn bridges, we'll let her burn them all. Another voice, older and more measured. The key is maintaining distance. Let her have her ethical crusade. By the time anyone realizes what we've moved offshore, she'll be completely discredited. Cameron stopped the recording. There's more. Hours of it. Phone calls about moving money, about NDAs, about making sure certain documents disappear before any investigation starts. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. He's not just leaving the firm. He's gutting it. I think so. And I think he's been planning to frame you for things you didn't do. What kind of things? There are emails in his draft folder. Messages that look like they're from you, approving some of the worst stuff in the Helix Dynamics reports. He hasn't sent them yet, but if an investigation starts, suddenly, there will be evidence that I was involved in the cover-up. Cameron nodded miserably. I'm sorry. I know this is horrible to hear, but I thought you should know what you're really fighting. I sat back in my chair, processing the magnitude of Ethan's betrayal. It wasn't just about leaving me or even about the affair I'd assumed was happening. He'd been systematically positioning me to take the fall for his corruption while he escaped to a prestigious new position with a clean reputation. Cameron, I need those recordings. I can't just, you can and you will. Because if you don't, Ethan is going to destroy both of us. You for knowing too much, and me for existing. She was quiet for a long moment. What will you do with them? I'm going to give them to my lawyer, and to a federal investigator, and to anyone else who needs to hear them. He'll know they came from me. He's going to fire you anyway. You said it yourself, you know too much. Your choice is whether you want to be his victim or his enemy. Cameron's hands were shaking now. I could lose everything. My career, my visa status. I'm not even a citizen, which is exactly why he chose you. You're vulnerable, disposable, just like he thought I was. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. But you're not disposable, and neither am I. Help me stop him, and I'll make sure you're protected. An hour later, I sat in Victor Chang's office with Cameron beside me, watching him review the audio files she'd transferred to an encrypted drive. His expression grew grimmer with each recording. This is extraordinary, he said finally. It's not just evidence of the original fraud. It's evidence of ongoing conspiracy to obstruct justice and destroy evidence. What does that mean legally? I asked. It means this case just became much bigger and much more dangerous. Victor turned to Cameron. Miss Torres, you understand that these recordings make you a key witness in a federal investigation? That you'll need protection and probably new employment? Cameron nodded, though she looked terrified. I understand. Good. Because I'm going to recommend that we move very quickly on this. The longer we wait, the more time they have to destroy evidence and disappear assets. Victor's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped into an adjoining office, leaving Cameron and me alone. Are you okay? I asked. No, but I'm tired of being scared all the time. And I'm tired of watching him hurt people. He's been hurting you too. Not the way he hurt you. But, yeah, he has. Victor returned, his expression grave. That was a contact at the SEC. There's been some unusual activity around Helix Dynamics stock. Large volume trades, options movements. Someone with inside information appears to be positioning themselves for significant price volatility. Ethan, possibly, or someone he's working with, but it suggests they're expecting news that will impact the stock price, probably negative news. I felt a chill. They're expecting the investigation to go public, which means they know it's coming, which means Victor stopped, looking between Cameron and me. Which means we may have a leak somewhere in the system, or, Cameron said quietly, they're planning to trigger it themselves. What do you mean? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What if they're not trying to avoid an investigation? What if they're planning to control it? Make sure it happens at the right time, focuses on the right targets, reaches the right conclusions? Victor was very still. Explain. Ethan's been in contact with someone at the SEC, someone named Rodriguez. I heard him on a call 2 days ago, talking about timing the disclosure and managing the narrative. What if they're planning to throw somebody under the bus to protect the bigger players? Somebody like Jade. Cameron nodded. He's got those draft emails that would make it look like she was the one pushing for the cover-up. And if the investigation focuses on Monroe Caldwell instead of Helix Dynamics, the real criminals escape while the whistleblower gets prosecuted. Victor was already reaching for his phone. I need to make some calls. This changes everything. While Victor worked his contacts, I stepped outside to call Amira. The afternoon sun was bright on the financial district sidewalks, but I felt cold to my bones. They're trying to frame me, I said when she answered. Who's trying to frame you? I explained about the recordings, the draft emails, the SEC contact. When I finished, Amira was quiet for a long moment. Jesus, Jade. This isn't just divorce proceedings anymore. This is criminal conspiracy. I know. Victor thinks we need to move fast, before they can set their plan in motion. How fast? Tomorrow fast. Maybe tonight? Tonight? Jade, that's the only way to stay ahead of them. If we wait, I become the villain in this story instead of the victim. I could hear Amira typing in the background. Okay, what do you need from me? Everything. Partnership dissolution papers, cease and desist orders, injunctions against asset transfers. I want to lock down everything they might try to move or hide. That's going to require emergency filings, and judge, shopping, and probably calling in favors I was saving for later. Do it, Jade. Are you sure about this? Once we file these papers, there's no pretending this is an amicable separation. This becomes war. I thought about Ethan's voice on Cameron's recording, dismissing me as someone who'd destroyed her own career. I thought about the fake emails he'd prepared to make me look complicit in fraud that could kill people. I thought about the 23% higher false negative rate for Black women with cardiac symptoms. It's already war, I said. He just forgot to tell me. That evening, I sat in my apartment now, since Amira had filed papers, asserting my legal right to remain in our shared residence, preparing the most important email I would ever write. Victor had given me an encrypted address for a joint task force investigating healthcare AI fraud. The email would contain every piece of evidence we'd gathered, every recording Cameron had made, every document that showed the scope of Ethan's corruption. But it would also make me officially a federal whistleblower. With all the protection and scrutiny that entailed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Last chance to do this quietly. Call me. Yeah, I deleted it without responding. Another text. This one from Cameron. He just called me into his office. He knows something's wrong. I think you should send that email tonight. I looked at my laptop screen, cursor hovering over the send button. Once I clicked it, there would be no going back. No reconciliation, no quiet divorce, no maintaining the fiction that this was about irreconcilable differences rather than systematic fraud. I thought about my father, who'd chosen to teach at a community college because he believed education should serve the community rather than elite institutions. I thought about the patients who would receive biased diagnoses if Ethan's corruption went unpunished. I thought about the woman I wanted to be when this was over. I clicked send. The email disappeared into the encrypted ether, carrying with it enough evidence to destroy my husband's career and possibly land him in federal prison. My phone immediately buzzed with a confirmation from Victor received. Well done. The wheels are now in motion. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. Somewhere in this city, Ethan was probably planning his next move, confident that his pregnant wife was too destroyed to fight back effectively. He was about to learn how wrong he was. My phone rang. Nora Alvarez. The journalist from Tech Ethics Quarterly. Dr. Monroe, she said when I answered. I've been doing some follow-up research on your presentation yesterday. I think we should talk. About what? About helix dynamics. About algorithmic bias in healthcare AI. And about why certain consulting firms might be helping companies hide evidence of discrimination. I smiled for the first time in days. How soon can you be here? Nora Alvarez arrived at my apartment 40 minutes later, carrying a leather messenger bag and the focused energy of a journalist who'd caught the scent of a big story. I'd spent the intervening time pacing, checking my encrypted email, and trying to process the magnitude of what I'd just set in motion. Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice, she said, settling into the chair across from my couch. I have to say, your presentation yesterday raised some interesting questions. What kind of questions? The kind that require sources. I can't reveal in documents I can't publish without corroboration. She pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the coffee table between us. May I? I nodded, though my stomach tightened. What exactly are you investigating? Healthcare AI bias. Specifically, how consulting firms help medical technology companies navigate regulatory approval despite known discrimination issues. She leaned forward. I've been tracking this story for 8 months, but I've been stonewalled by NDAs, legal threats, and very careful corporate communications departments. And you think I can help? I think you might be the missing piece. Your presentation was remarkably specific about diagnostic accuracy disparities. 23% higher false negative rates for Black women with cardiac symptoms. That's not a hypothetical number, is it? I was quiet for a long moment, weighing my options. The federal investigation was already in motion, but having a credible journalist on the story could provide protection and public accountability that legal proceedings alone couldn't guarantee. What I tell you has to stay confidential until I say otherwise, I said finally. Agreed. Background only until you give me permission to publish. I told her everything. The files Ethan had left behind, the systematic corruption at Helix Dynamics, the draft emails designed to frame me, Cameron's recordings. By the time I finished, Nora's expression had shifted from professional interest to barely contained excitement. This is massive, she said. We're talking about federal crimes, patient safety violations, and corporate conspiracy. Do you have documentation? Some. My attorney has most of it now. Victor Chang? I nodded, unsurprised that she'd already identified him. Good journalists did their homework. He's got a solid reputation. If he's taking your case, the evidence must be substantial. She paused the recorder. Off the record, how are you holding up? This can't be easy on a personal level. I'm angry, I said honestly, but I'm more afraid of what happens if we don't stop this. People will die because of biased algorithms, and the people responsible will profit from it. And your husband? My soon-to-be ex-husband chose his path. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Nora restarted the recorder. Walk me through the timeline of your discovery. When did you first realize something was wrong? I spent the next hour providing a detailed chronology, from Ethan's text message through Cameron's revelations to my decision to contact federal investigators. Nora asked sharp questions about dates, relationships, and corroborating evidence. One more question, she said as she packed up her equipment. Are you prepared for the public scrutiny this will bring? When this story breaks, and it will break, you'll be the face of it. The whistleblower who brought down her own husband's firm. I've been thinking about that, but I'd rather be known as the woman who stopped algorithmic bias than the one who stayed silent about it, even if it destroys your marriage and your career. My marriage was already destroyed, and if standing up for ethical AI development destroys my career, then I was in the wrong career to begin with. After Nora left, I called Professor Yamada. I needed to hear the voice of someone who'd navigated ethics crises before, someone who understood the weight of choosing principles over convenience. Jade, she said warmly when she answered. I was hoping you'd call. I've been thinking about your presentation. I need advice. About what comes next. Tell me. I explained about the federal investigation, the evidence, the potential media coverage. When I finished, Loretta was quiet for a long time. You know there's no going back from this, she said finally. Whatever happens with your marriage, your career, your reputation, this decision will define how people see you for years to come. I know. Good. Because the Jade Monroe I know has always chosen difficult truths over comfortable lies. I'm glad to see that hasn't changed. I'm scared, Loretta. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm destroying people's lives over something that's less serious than I think? What does your gut tell you? I thought about the diagnostic algorithm that would send black women home from emergency rooms at a 23% higher rate. I thought about the patients who would suffer cardiac events that could have been prevented if the AI system had been trained fairly. My gut tells me that people will die if I don't act. Then you have your answer. Fear is not a moral compass. Jade, justice is. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone for updates from Victor, from Amira, from the federal task force. At a.m., my laptop chimed with an encrypted email. Dr. Monroe, thank you for your submission. We are moving to secure relevant materials and witnesses immediately. Please remain available for additional interviews. Do not discuss this matter with anyone not already involved. Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division, FBI. The federal investigation had escalated from the SEC to Criminal Fraud Division in less than 12 hours. Whatever Victor had submitted was serious enough to trigger a multi-agency response. My phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. They searched the office tonight. Federal agents. Ethan is freaking out. I think he knows. I called Victor immediately. Despite the hour, I was expecting your call, he said, sounding wide awake. You saw the FBI notification? They're moving fast, faster than I expected. Agent Chen called me directly. Apparently, your evidence corroborates an existing investigation. They've been conducting into healthcare AI fraud. You may have provided the missing pieces they needed. What happens now? Now we wait, and we prepare for Ethan's counterattack, because it's coming. Victor was right. The counterattack came at a.m. in the form of a cease and desist letter delivered to my apartment building. The law firm letterhead was impressive: Kravitz, Swain and Moore, and the language was aggressively formal. The letter accused me of corporate espionage, theft of proprietary information, violation of confidentiality agreements, and defamation. It demanded that I return all company materials, retract any statements made to third parties, and submit to a forensic audit of my personal devices. I forwarded it to Amira and Victor, then made coffee and toast like it was a normal Tuesday morning. If Ethan thought expensive lawyers would intimidate me into backing down, he'd clearly forgotten who he'd married. Amira called within the hour. This is bullshit legal theater, she said without preamble. Classic intimidation tactics. But it also tells us they're scared. How so? Because if they had a strong position, they'd be filing criminal charges or seeking emergency injunctions. Instead, they're making threats and hoping you'll fold. What should I do? Nothing. Let Victor handle the federal response, and I'll draft a reply that basically tells them to go fuck themselves in very polite legal language. At a.m., my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Jade, it's Marcus Harrison, from Whitfield and Associates. I nearly dropped the phone. Marcus Harrison, the managing partner Cameron had mentioned, the one Ethan had been in secret contact with. Mr. Harrison, this is unexpected. I imagine it is. I was hoping we could have a conversation about your situation with Ethan and Monroe Caldwell. I'm not sure what there is to discuss. I think there's quite a lot to discuss. Why don't you come to New York? I'd like to offer you an opportunity that might be mutually beneficial. I felt a chill. What kind of opportunity? The kind that could resolve your current difficulties while advancing your career. Whitfield has been looking for someone with your expertise in AI ethics, someone with credibility and principles. And in exchange, certain recent misunderstandings could be clarified. Certain allegations could be contextualized. You could move forward with your career instead of being dragged down by unpleasantness. I understood perfectly. Harrison was offering me a prestigious job in exchange for dropping the federal investigation. He was betting that I'd choose career advancement over pursuing justice. That's a generous offer, I said carefully. But I'm not interested in leaving San Francisco right now. Think about it. These federal investigations can be very disruptive, very public, very damaging to everyone involved, even the innocent parties. Wouldn't it be better to resolve things quietly? Mr. Harrison, are you offering me a job or trying to buy my silence? A pause. I'm offering you a future, Dr. Monroe. The alternative might not be as pleasant. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. Good day, Dr. Monroe. He hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Victor and relayed the conversation. Son of a bitch, he said when I finished. They're panicking. That was attempted obstruction of justice. Should I have handled it differently? No. You did perfectly. Did you record it? No. I didn't think next time. Record everything. And there will be a next time. They're going to keep trying different approaches until something sticks. At noon, my doorbell rang. I expected it to be a delivery or maybe another process server, but when I opened the door, I found Ethan standing in the hallway. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. This was not the composed, calculating man who destroyed our marriage via text message 3 days ago. We need to talk, he said. No, we don't. Call my lawyer. I started to close the door, but he put his hand against it. Jade, please. 5 minutes. This is spiraling out of control. It's exactly as controlled as I want it to be. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The people I'm working with, they're not going to just let this go. They have resources, connections. They can destroy you. The way you tried to destroy me, I never tried to the draft emails, Ethan. The ones where you made it look like I approved the Helix cover-up. Did you think I wouldn't find out? His face went pale. How did I find out that my own husband was planning to frame me for federal crimes? Let's just say you're not as smart as you think you are. Jade, listen to me. If you drop this investigation, I can make sure you're protected. I can make sure none of this touches you. And if I don't, his expression hardened, then you're on your own against people who have more power than you can imagine. I looked at this man I'd been married to for 6 years, this stranger who was threatening me in my own doorway, and felt something click into place. The last vestige of love, of hope for reconciliation, of grief for what we'd lost, it all crystallized into something harder and cleaner. You chose to bury me, I said quietly. You forgot I was soil. I closed the door in his face and turned the deadbolt. Then I walked to my laptop and composed an email to Agent Chen, detailing Harrison's job offer and Ethan's threats. If they wanted to escalate, I was ready to meet them at whatever level they chose. My phone buzzed with a text from Nora. Story's ready. Are you prepared for this to go public? I typed back, yes. Publish it. Within an hour, Tech Ethics Quarterly's website featured a breaking news story. Healthcare AI bias cover-up. Federal investigation targets major consulting firm. The article detailed the allegations against Monroe Caldwell and Helix Dynamics, cited anonymous sources familiar with the investigation, and included quotes from my Ethics Summit presentation. My phone immediately exploded with calls from journalists, colleagues, and former clients. I turned it off and poured myself a glass of wine. The story was out now, beyond anyone's ability to control or contain. Ethan had taught me that power came from controlling information, managing narratives, keeping secrets. But he'd forgotten the most important lesson. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth and let the consequences follow. The war was no longer theoretical. It was public, documented, and spreading through Silicon Valley like wildfire. And for the first time since this all began, I felt like I was winning. The morning after Nora's article published, I woke to find my name trending on Twitter. Not in a good way. Jade Monroe was accompanied by hashtags like #corporate-betrayal and #whistleblower-wife, with thousands of tweets dissecting my marriage, my motives, and my character. The responses split predictably. Half praised me as a brave truth-teller, while the other half painted me as a vindictive ex-wife weaponizing federal agencies for personal revenge. At Tech Ethics No, Dr. Jade Monroe is a hero for exposing healthcare AI bias. More whistleblowers like her, please. At Silicon Valley die. Woman scorned destroys husband's company because he left her. Classic. At Bias and I, 23% higher false negative rates for Black women equals lives lost. Thank you at Drajata Monroe for your courage. At Startup Bro Code. This is why you never go into business with your wife. Bitches be crazy. #marriage. I says Cami closed Twitter and made coffee, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Public vindication felt hollower than I'd expected when it came mixed with character assassination and casual misogyny. My phone rang. Victor Chang. How are you holding up? He asked. I've been better. The internet has some strong opinions about my life choices. The internet has strong opinions about everything. What matters is that Agent Chen called this morning. The article has prompted 3 additional whistleblowers to come forward with information about healthcare AI fraud. Your story is giving other people courage to speak up. That helped. Whatever the personal cost, I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. What's the next step? Chen wants to meet with you this afternoon. Formal interview. On the record. Are you ready for that? Yes, but Victor, there's something else. Cameron Torres called me this morning. She's been getting threats. What kind of threats? Anonymous. Calls telling her to keep her mouth shut. Someone followed her home from work yesterday. She's scared. Victor was quiet for a moment. We need to get her into protective custody. This is escalating faster than I anticipated. At PM, I sat in a sterile FBI conference room across from Agent Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that suggested she'd seen everything twice. A digital recorder sat between us. On the metal table, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. Dr. Monroe, thank you for coming in. I know this can't be easy. It's not, but it's necessary. Let's start with the timeline. When did you first become aware of irregularities in your husband's work with Helix Dynamics? I walked her through everything again: the accidental file discovery, the emails detailing algorithmic bias, the systematic cover-up of discriminatory outcomes. Agent Chen took detailed notes, occasionally stopping to ask for clarification or additional documentation. These recordings that Miss Torres provided, she said, pulling up audio files on her laptop. They reference someone named Rodriguez at the SEC. Do you know who that might be? No, but Cameron might have more details. Miss Torres is being interviewed by my colleague as we speak. She's also being moved to a safe location temporarily. She's in danger? Let's just say that people who threaten federal witnesses tend to get our attention quickly. Agent Chen spent another hour asking about my relationship with Ethan, my knowledge of Monroe Caldwell's client relationships, and my understanding of the healthcare AI regulatory process. Her questions were precise, professional, and designed to establish both my credibility and the scope of the conspiracy. One last question, she said as she closed her laptop. Are you prepared for the possibility that this investigation could take years to resolve? That your personal life will be under scrutiny for the duration? Agent Chen, my personal life was destroyed 3 days ago when my husband ended our marriage via text message. At this point, I'm more concerned about the patients who will receive biased diagnoses than I am about my privacy. She smiled slightly. That's good to hear, because based on what we've learned in the past 24 hours, this case is about to get much bigger. When I returned home, I found my building's lobby swarming with reporters. Cameras flashed as I pushed through the crowd, ignoring shouted questions about my marriage, my motives, and my future plans. I'd expected media attention, but the intensity was overwhelming. Dr. Monroe, is it true you're seeking revenge against your husband? Dr. Monroe, how long have you known about the fraud? Dr. Monroe, are you planning to profit from the whistleblower settlement? I made it to the elevator without responding, but I could feel the weight of dozens of cameras recording my every expression. By the time I reached my apartment, videos of my hostile refusal to comment were already circulating online. My phone had 47 missed calls and twice as many text messages. Most were from journalists, but some were from colleagues, friends, and former clients. The messages ranged from supportive to accusatory, with a few that made me glad I'd changed my locks. One call was from a number I recognized, Dr. Elizabeth Kumar, Chief Medical Officer at UCSF Medical Center. She'd been a client of Monroe Caldwell's 2 years ago, when we'd helped them evaluate AI diagnostic tools for their emergency department. I called her back. Jade, she said when she answered, I've been following the news. I wanted you to know that what you're doing is important. Thank you. That means a lot. I also wanted to tell you something about the AI system we implemented based on Monroe Caldwell's recommendations. We've been tracking its performance, and there are disparities. Exactly the kind you're describing in your allegations. My stomach dropped. What kind of disparities? Higher false negative rates for women of color. Misdiagnoses that should have been caught. We'd attributed it to data quality issues, but after reading today's article, Elizabeth, you need to contact the FBI. Agent Sarah Chen, this could be evidence in their investigation. I'm already planning to. But Jade, there are probably other hospitals experiencing the same problems. Other medical centers that implemented bias systems without realizing it. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment as the magnitude of the situation sank in. This wasn't just about Monroe Caldwell or Helix Dynamics. It was about a systemic problem that had already affected patient care at multiple institutions. The fraud I'd uncovered wasn't theoretical, it was actively harming people right now. My doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman with tears in her eyes, holding a manila envelope. Dr. Monroe, my name is Sarah Kim. I work at Helix Dynamics. I read the article about you today. I opened the door cautiously. What can I do for you? I have documents about the bias testing, about the cover-up. I've been trying to figure out what to do with them for months, but I was scared of losing my job. After reading what you did, she handed me the envelope. There are more of us. Employees who've been documenting problems, keeping records, waiting for someone brave enough to speak up first. I invited her in, and for the next hour, she walked me through internal Helix Dynamics communications that were even more damning than Ethan's files. Test results showing discriminatory outcomes across multiple demographic groups. Executive emails discussing strategies to minimize regulatory scrutiny. Financial projections based on market penetration despite known bias issues. How many other employees have similar documentation? I asked. At least a dozen, maybe more, but we were all too scared to act individually. And now we have you. Someone who proved it's possible to fight back and survive. After Sarah left, I called Victor. With the update, this is extraordinary, he said. We're looking at potential RICO charges if we can prove systematic corruption across multiple organizations. RICO, racketeering, organized criminal enterprise. If Helix Dynamics, Monroe Caldwell, and potentially other firms were working together to defraud regulators and endanger patients, that's not just individual corruption, it's conspiracy. That evening, I received a call from an unexpected source. Cameron Torres. Jade, are you watching the news? I turned on CNN where a breaking news banner read, Helix Dynamics stock plummets amid fraud allegations. The stock had dropped 40% in after-hours trading as investors fled following Nora's article and the FBI's confirmation of an active investigation. There's more, Cameron said. I just got a call from Marcus Harrison's office. They're withdrawing Ethan's job offer at Whitfield and Associates. Apparently, they don't want to be associated with him while the investigation is ongoing. I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. Ethan's carefully planned escape route had been cut off, but it also meant he would likely become more desperate and dangerous. How is he handling it? I asked. Not well. He's been calling clients all day, trying to convince them that this is all a misunderstanding. But 3 major contracts have been canceled already. The Singapore deal is under review. And the landlord for our office space is asking questions about our lease. Cameron, are you safe? The FBI said you were getting threats. I'm in a hotel downtown. Federal protection until the investigation is complete. It's surreal. But I feel safer than I have in months. Good. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Jade, thank you for giving me the courage to do the right thing. I know I should have spoken up sooner, but you spoke up when it mattered. That's what counts. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my windows, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. Somewhere in this city, Ethan was probably realizing that his world was collapsing as methodically as he'd tried to collapse mine. The difference was that his destruction was self-inflicted, the inevitable consequence of choosing profit over principles. My phone buzzed with a text from Nora. Follow-up story publishing tomorrow. New whistleblowers, additional evidence, regulatory response. This is becoming the biggest healthcare AI scandal in years. I smiled, typing back, good. People deserve to know the truth. Another text, this one from Professor Yamada. Saw you on the news. You look tired but determined. Your father would be proud. I wiped away tears I hadn't realized were falling. Whatever happened next, whatever personal cost I paid for this fight, I knew I was honoring the values that had shaped me. The community, college professor who'd taught me that integrity wasn't negotiable. The working class parents who'd saved every penny to give me opportunities they'd never had. The philosophy that said some things mattered more than money or comfort or even love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new attempts to intimidate me into silence. But tonight, I could look at my reflection in the darkened window and see someone I recognized. The woman I'd always been underneath, the wife, the business partner, the accommodating presence who'd shaped herself around someone else's ambitions. Ethan had tried to bury me, but he'd forgotten the most important truth about soil. It's where new things grow. The call came at M on a Saturday, 2 weeks after the story broke. I'd been expecting it. My brother Rafi had a way of reaching out exactly when I needed him most, even when I didn't realize it myself. Sis, his voice was warm but concerned. I've been watching the news. You look like hell. Good morning too. You too. I managed a laugh despite everything. And thanks for the pep talk. I'm serious. When's the last time you left that apartment for something other than FBI interviews or dodging reporters? I thought about it. Since the scandal exploded, my world had shrunk to federal buildings, legal offices, and my apartment. I'd been surviving on takeout and coffee, fielding calls from journalists, and trying to manage the constant stream of threats, support messages, and business proposals flooding my phone. Come home, Rafi said simply. Not permanently, just for a weekend. Remember where you came from before you decide where you're going. 2 hours later, I was driving across the Bay Bridge toward Oakland, leaving behind the gleaming towers of San Francisco for the working-class neighborhood where I'd grown up. The contrast was stark, from million-dollar condos to modest bungalows, from tech bros to teachers and mechanics and healthcare workers who kept the world running while others profited from it. Rafi lived in the same craftsman house where we'd grown up, the one he'd bought from our mother when she decided to move to a retirement community in Sacramento. He'd renovated it slowly over the years, adding a workshop in the garage where he restored vintage motorcycles and a classroom in the basement where he taught coding to kids from the neighborhood. You look like you haven't slept in weeks, he said, wrapping me in a bear hug on the front porch. I haven't. Every time I close my eyes, I think about all the ways this could go wrong, or all the ways it could go right. I followed him into the kitchen, where the smell of coffee and bacon reminded me that normal life still existed somewhere. Rafi had always been the steady one, the brother who'd come home from Afghanistan with invisible scars but an unshakable commitment to building something positive from whatever pieces he'd been given. Tell me about the kids, I said, settling into the breakfast nook where we'd done homework 20 years ago, 15 this semester. Ages 12 to 17. Half of them are girls, which is progress. And 3 of them just got accepted to coding boot camps that will pay them to learn. His pride was evident. That's 3 more kids who won't have to choose between rent and education. Dad would have loved that. Dad would have loved what you're doing too. Fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. I picked at the eggs he'd made, my appetite still erratic after weeks of stress. Dad never had to destroy his marriage to do the right thing. Dad never married someone who was actively harming people. Rafi sat down across from me, his expression serious. Jade, you know I liked Ethan. We all did. But the man who ends his marriage via text and tries to frame his wife for federal crimes, that's not someone you lost. That's someone you never really had. We spent the morning walking through the neighborhood, past the community college where our father had taught philosophy to first-generation immigrants and returning veterans, past the clinic where our mother had worked as a nurse practitioner, treating patients regardless of their ability to pay, past the library where I'd discovered computer programming in middle school, hunched over ancient terminals while other kids played outside. You know what I've been thinking about, Rafi said as we sat on a bench in the park where we'd played as children. That ethics presentation you gave in high school, remember? For the senior project? I did remember. I'd chosen to research algorithmic bias in criminal justice systems, even though the term algorithmic bias wasn't commonly used yet. I'd interviewed public defenders, analyzed arrest data, and concluded that computer systems could perpetuate injustice just as effectively as human prejudice. You were 17 years old, and you already understood that technology wasn't neutral, Rafi continued. That it could either amplify existing inequalities or help create a fairer world, depending on who built it and how. What's your point? My point is that this fight isn't new for you. It's not about revenge or ambition or even your marriage. It's about the same thing you've always cared about: making sure powerful systems serve everyone, not just the people who build them. We walked home through streets lined with murals celebrating community leaders, immigrant stories, and social justice movements. This was the Oakland that had shaped me, a place where people looked out for each other, where standing up to power was considered a civic duty, where making money was fine but making a difference was better. That evening, Rafi organized a small dinner with some of our father's former colleagues, professors, community organizers, and activists who'd known me since I was a teenager with strong opinions about everything. They didn't ask about Ethan or the investigation or the media coverage. Instead, they talked about the work they were doing, the communities they were serving, the small victories that didn't make headlines but changed individual lives. Dr. Maria Santos, who'd taken over my father's philosophy courses, leaned forward during dessert. "Jade, I've been following your story. What you're doing reminds me of something your father used to say." "What's that?" "He said that integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to pay the price for your principles when the bill comes due. The bill is pretty steep right now, but you're paying it. That's what matters." Later that night, Rafi and I sat on the back porch, sharing a bottle of wine and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood distant music, conversations in Spanish and English and Mandarin, the occasional motorcycle engine that meant one of his former students was showing off their restoration project. "I've been offered jobs," I said finally. "3 different firms want to hire me as their head of ethics. Good money, prestigious clients, a chance to rebuild my career on my own terms. But they all feel like ways to profit from this mess. Look, hire the famous whistleblower, prove how ethical we are." It feels hollow. What would feel authentic? I thought about Sarah Kim and the other Helix Dynamics employees who'd found the courage to speak up. About Dr. Kumar and the hospitals trying to fix biased AI systems. About the 3 additional whistleblowers who'd contacted Agent Chen after reading my story. I want to start something new. A nonprofit, maybe. Something that helps people navigate these ethical crises without having to choose between their principles and their livelihoods, like a support network for whistleblowers. Bigger than that, an organization that helps companies build ethical AI systems from the ground up, that trains employees to recognize bias and speak up about it, that provides legal and financial support for people who want to do the right thing but can't afford the consequences. Rafi smiled. That sounds like something Dad would have designed if he'd lived in the tech age. It also sounds expensive and complicated and possibly impossible, so did coding boot camps for at-risk kids. Didn't stop me from trying. Sunday morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom feeling more rested than I had in weeks. The walls still held posters from my teenage years, Marie Curie, Maya Angelou, and a young Barack Obama with the word hope underneath his photo. Aspirational figures who'd faced adversity with grace and determination. Over breakfast, Rafi showed me the business plan he'd been quietly developing for his coding program. Budget projections, curriculum designs, partnership proposals with local schools and community organizations. He'd turned his personal mission into a sustainable organization that was already changing lives. "How did you know it would work?" I asked. I didn't, but I knew the alternative was unacceptable. Too many kids in this neighborhood grow up thinking technology isn't for them, that coding is something other people do. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try to change that. I spent the afternoon working on my laptop in the backyard, sketching out ideas for what would eventually become the Ethical AI Foundation. Mission statement, program objectives, funding strategies. For the first time since this whole crisis began, I felt excited about the future instead of just surviving the present. My phone buzzed with a call from Victor Chang. "Jade, I have an update. Helix Dynamics is negotiating a settlement with the Justice Department. They're looking at a $150 million fine plus agreement to independent monitoring of all their AI development. What about criminal charges? That's still being negotiated. But it looks like several executives will face personal liability, including potentially your husband." I felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction, sadness, and something approaching closure. What's the timeline? Probably another 6 months for everything to be finalized. But the immediate crisis is over. "You're going to be fine, Jade. More than fine." After Victor hung up, I called Cameron, who'd been staying with a cousin in Portland while the FBI finished their investigation. "I heard about the settlement," she said. "It's really over?" "The legal part is. The hard part, figuring out what comes next, that's just beginning." "I've been thinking about that too. I want to go back to school. Journalism, maybe, or law. Something where I can help people instead of just helping companies avoid accountability." That sounds perfect. What about you? Are you going back to consulting? I looked around my father's backyard at the vegetable garden he'd planted and Rafi had maintained, at the workshop where broken things were made whole again, at the home where I'd learned that success meant more than money or status. "I'm going to build something new," I said. Something Dad would have been proud of. That evening, as I prepared to drive back to San Francisco, Rafi handed me a small wooden box. "Dad's philosophy books are in storage, but I saved this for you." Inside was my father's compass, not a navigation tool, but a moral one. A simple brass circle with an inscription he'd had engraved. True north isn't a place on a map. It's a direction you choose. He carried this through graduate school, through his teaching career, through every difficult decision he ever made. Raffi said, I think it's time for you to have it. I closed my fingers around the cool metal, feeling the weight of inheritance and responsibility. Tomorrow I would return to the chaos of media attention, legal proceedings, and death threats from people who thought I'd betrayed some unwritten code of corporate loyalty. But tonight, I knew exactly who I was and what I was fighting for. The drive back to San Francisco was different this time. Instead of seeing the city's gleaming towers as symbols of achievement or ambition, I saw them as places where decisions were made that affected millions of lives. Places where the next generation of ethical leaders would need to stand up for principles over profit. I had work to do. The request came through Amira, delivered with the careful neutrality of a lawyer who'd seen too many bad decisions to offer. Unsolicited advice. Ethan wants to meet, she said during our weekly check-in. Neutral location, both attorneys present, strictly settlement discussions. I was sitting in my apartment, surrounded by printed articles about the ethical AI foundation I was building. Grant applications spread across my coffee table like seeds waiting to be planted. 3 weeks had passed since my weekend in Oakland, and I'd thrown myself into creating something meaningful from the wreckage of my marriage. Settlement discussions about what? The divorce is already proceeding. The criminal investigation is out of our hands. I think he wants to apologize, and maybe negotiate some kind of understanding about public statements going forward. Understanding? He's scared, Jade. The Justice Department is talking about individual criminal charges. His legal bills are astronomical. His reputation is destroyed. I think he wants to see if there's any way to limit the damage. I thought about it while staring out at the San Francisco skyline. For 6 years, I'd loved a man who I thought shared my values. For the past month, I'd been systematically dismantling the life of someone who'd turned out to be a stranger. The opportunity to look him in the eye one last time, to see who he really was beneath the charm and calculation, held a certain appeal. Where and when? Conference room at my office. Tomorrow at PM, 1 hour maximum. Will you be there? If you want me to be. But Jade, be careful. He's desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things. The next afternoon, I walked into Amira's law firm wearing the navy suit I'd worn to deliver my Ethics Summit presentation armor. Disguised as professional attire, the conference room was sterile and formal, all glass and steel designed to discourage emotional displays. Ethan was already there with his attorney, a sharp-faced woman from Kravith who'd probably cost more per hour than most people made in a week. He looked smaller than I remembered, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame that had lost weight over the past month. The confident posture I'd fallen in love with had been replaced by something more hunched, defensive. Jade, he said, when I entered. Thank you for coming. I took the seat across from him without responding. Amira settled beside me, her legal pad ready, while his attorney Janet something adjusted her glasses and opened a folder thick with documents. Let's start with why we're here, Janet said. My client would like to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to the ongoing publicity around your divorce proceedings. I'm listening. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes searching my face for some sign of the woman who'd once loved him. Jade, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But this situation has spiraled far beyond what either of us intended. What I intended was to stay married to someone I thought had integrity. What you intended was to commit federal crimes and frame me for them. These are not equivalent disappointments. His jaw tightened. I never intended to frame you. Those draft emails were backup plans in case your first strategy failed. Let's not pretend you're the victim here. Janet intervened smoothly. Mrs. Monroe, my client is prepared to offer substantial financial compensation in exchange for your agreement to refrain from further public statements about this matter. How substantial? $2 million, plus your full ownership of Monroe Caldwell Consulting, including all intellectual property and client relationships. I almost laughed. The company that's currently under federal investigation for fraud? The one that's lost 3/4 of its clients in the past month? How generous. It's more than you'll get if this goes to trial, Janet said. Especially considering that protracted litigation could damage your own reputation and career prospects. Is that a threat? It's a reality check, Ethan said, his composure cracking slightly. Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to me, But to everyone who worked for us, Cameron's unemployed. 3 junior consultants had to find new jobs. Our admin assistant lost her health insurance. The admin assistant who helped you manipulate client files. The junior consultants who knew about the bias issues and said nothing. Cameron's doing fine, she's going back to school to become a journalist. You destroyed an entire company over a personal grudge. Something cold and clean settled in my chest. I exposed systematic fraud that was literally killing people. If you can't see the difference, that explains how we got here. Amira placed a hand on my arm, a subtle reminder to stay calm. But I was calm, calmer than I'd been in weeks. Looking at Ethan across this sterile table, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Let me save us all some time, I said. I'm not interested in your money or your company or your attempts to buy my silence. The federal investigation will proceed regardless of what I say publicly. The story is already out there, being followed by dozens of journalists who don't need my cooperation to continue reporting on it. Jade, please. Just listen for a minute. Ethan's voice had dropped to the intimate tone he'd used during our marriage, the one that had once made me feel like the only person in the room. I know. I handled the divorce badly. I know I hurt you, but we built something together once. We can build something again. Are you suggesting we reconcile? I'm suggesting we find a way forward that doesn't destroy both of us. I studied his face, looking for signs of the man I'd fallen in love with, the passionate graduate student who'd talked about using technology to create a more just world, the young entrepreneur who'd cried when we landed our first major client. The husband who'd held me after my father's funeral and promised we'd honor his memory by living with integrity. When did you change? I asked quietly. When did profit become more important than people? I didn't change. I grew up. I learned that good intentions don't pay mortgages or build companies or create opportunities for other people. Good intentions don't, but good work does. Ethical work does. The foundation I'm building has already received $3 million in initial funding from people who believe that technology companies can do better. Ethan's expression shifted from pleading to frustrated. A foundation? Jade, you're throwing away a successful career to become a nonprofit do-gooder? You have a PAAHDAADDDDHEHE from Berkeley. You could work for any tech company in Silicon Valley. I could, but I won't, because I've learned that there are more important things than career advancement. Like what? Like being able to look at myself in the mirror. Like honoring the values my father taught me. Like knowing that the work I do makes the world better instead of just making me richer. Janet cleared her throat. Mrs. Monroe, I think you're being unrealistic about your prospects. The whistleblower settlement from the Justice Department will likely be substantial, but federal investigations can take years to resolve. You'll need income in the meantime. I have income, and I have purpose. 2 things that seem to be in short supply at this table. Ethan slammed his hand on the conference table. This is ridiculous. You're destroying everything we built together out of some misguided sense of moral superiority. No, I said, standing up. You destroyed what we built together when you chose to prioritize your own advancement over the values we promised to share. I'm just cleaning up the wreckage. Jade, wait. He stood too, his desperation now visible to everyone in the room. If you won't take the money, if you won't agree to limit your public statements, at least tell me this. What do you want from me? What would it take for you to forgive me? I looked at him one last time, really looked at him. The expensive suit that couldn't hide his moral poverty. The practiced charm that couldn't mask his fundamental selfishness. The man who'd shared my bed for 6 years but had never really known me at all. I want you to face the consequences of your choices, I said. I want you to take responsibility for the harm you've caused. And I want you to understand that forgiveness isn't something you can negotiate or purchase, it's something you have to earn. How do I earn it? By becoming someone worthy of it, which might take a while. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and Ethan, the next time you want to destroy someone's life, make sure they don't have access to all your files. Amateur mistake. I left him sitting in that sterile conference room with his expensive lawyer and his empty offers, walking out into the San Francisco afternoon with my head high and my conscience clear. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt genuinely free. My phone buzzed as I reached the sidewalk. A text from Cameron. Saw the news about the Justice Department announcement. Individual criminal charges recommended for 3 Helix executives and 2 consultants. You did it. I typed back. We did it. All of us who chose truth over comfort. Another text. This one from Victor. Settlement meeting go well? Better than expected. I remembered who I am. And who is that? I thought about my father's compass in my purse, about the foundation taking shape in my apartment, about the community of ethical technologists who'd rallied around the idea that Silicon Valley could do better. Someone who doesn't negotiate with corruption. The walk back to my apartment took me through the heart of San Francisco's financial district, past the gleaming towers where deals were made and fortunes were built and moral compromises were justified as business necessities. I'd once been part of that world, had once believed that success meant climbing higher in buildings like these. Now I understood that real success meant something different. It meant building systems that served everyone, not just the people who could afford to purchase fairness. It meant creating institutions that prioritized integrity over profit. It meant choosing to be soil where new things could grow, rather than concrete where nothing could take root. As I walked, I composed a mental email to the journalists who'd been following my story. There would be one more statement, one final clarification of my position. Not because I owed Ethan anything, but because I owed it to everyone who'd found courage through my example. The meeting confirmed what I already knew. Some people are capable of change, and others are only capable of trying to change the consequences of their actions. I'm not interested in helping anyone avoid accountability for choices that harm vulnerable people. I'm interested in building a world where those choices become harder to make and easier to prevent. The Ethical AI Foundation will launch next month, with a mission to support technologists who want to do better, protect whistleblowers who expose wrongdoing, and advocate for AI systems that serve everyone equally. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice. And justice doesn't negotiate. That evening, I called Rafi to tell him about the meeting. How do you feel? He asked. Lighter. Like I finally put down something heavy I'd been carrying. Any regrets? About the marriage? Yes. About the investigation? No. About walking away from his settlement offer? Not for a second. Dad would be proud. I hope so. I'm certainly trying to make him proud. Jade, you know this means it's really over, right? Not just the marriage, but any possibility of reconciliation. I know, and I'm okay with that. Better than okay. Why? I looked around my apartment, at the grant applications and program designs and partnership proposals that represented my future, at the evidence that I could build something meaningful from the ruins of my marriage, at the proof that integrity was not just a luxury for people who could afford it, but a choice available to anyone brave enough to pay its price. Because I finally understand the difference between being alone and being lonely. I'm alone now, but I'm not lonely. I have work that matters, principles I won't compromise, and a community of people who share my values. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything, Rafi said. That's everything Dad tried to teach us. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began drafting the announcement for the Ethical AI Foundation's official launch. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a woman whose marriage was destroyed via text message. Tonight, I was someone who'd chosen to transform that destruction into something constructive. The difference felt like victory. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of a converted warehouse in Oakland's Arts District, watching volunteers hang a banner that read Ethical AI Foundation, building technology that serves everyone. The space buzzed with controlled chaos, tech workers setting up computer stations, journalists arranging chairs for the press conference, and community organizers discussing outreach strategies with former Silicon Valley executives who'd decided to use their expertise for something more meaningful than quarterly profits. 5 minutes to go live, called Marcus Webb, our communications director and former CNN tech correspondent who'd left cable news to help build something he called journalism with a mission. He'd been the third person to join the foundation. After reading about our work in Nora's follow-up articles, I adjusted the blazer I'd chosen for today's launch, not the navy armor I'd worn to confront Ethan, but a warm burgundy that felt more like celebration than battle. My prepared remarks sat folded in my pocket, but I'd memorized them weeks ago. This wasn't just a press conference. It was a declaration of what became possible when you chose principles over profit. Dr. Monroe, a young woman with familiar features, approached nervously. I'm Lisa Santos, Dr. Maria Santos's daughter. She said you knew my grandfather? I recognized her immediately. She had her grandmother's eyes and the determined expression I remembered from family photos in my father's office. Your grandfather taught philosophy alongside my dad at Oakland Community College. They used to argue about Kant and Aristotle for hours. Mom said you're doing the kind of work Grandpa would have loved, helping people make ethical choices in the tech world. That's the goal. Are you interested in technology? Computer science major at Berkeley, but I want to focus on AI safety and bias detection. After reading about your case, she paused, gathering courage. I want to make sure AI systems work fairly for people like my family. Before I could respond, Cameron Torres appeared at my elbow, clipboard in hand and a confidence I barely recognized from our coffee shop meeting months ago. She'd cut her hair short and traded Instagram-ready outfits for practical clothes that suggested someone more interested in getting work done than looking perfect while doing it. "Jade, we're ready for you," she said, then turned to Lisa. "Are you here for the fellowship program announcement?" "Fellowship program?" Lisa's eyes lit up. "Full ride through Berkeley's AI Ethics Master's program, plus summer internship with our policy team. Applications open next week." Cameron smiled. "Dr. Monroe insisted we invest in the next generation of ethical technologists." As Lisa hurried to grab an application packet, I marveled at how much had changed. Cameron had enrolled in UC Berkeley's journalism program but spent her weekends volunteering for the foundation, using her inside knowledge of corporate PR to help us communicate effectively with both tech workers and the communities they served. Her transformation from Ethan's unwitting accomplice to passionate advocate had been remarkable to witness. 2 minutes, Marcus called out. I walked to the makeshift stage, really just a slightly raised platform we'd built from recycled materials, another symbol of building something meaningful from discarded pieces. The audience included faces I recognized from across the spectrum of San Francisco's tech community, former colleagues who'd quietly supported my whistleblowing, journalists who'd covered the story, activists who'd fought algorithmic bias for years, and dozens of people I didn't know but who'd been following our work online. In the back corner, I spotted Nora Alvarez with her notebook, documenting the foundation's launch as the next chapter in a story that had started with corporate corruption and evolved into something more hopeful. Agent Sarah Chen stood near the back door, no longer investigating me but genuinely interested in our fraud prevention programs. Professor Yamada sat in the front row, her presence both an honor and a reminder of the academic integrity that had guided this entire journey. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said into the microphone, "please welcome Dr. Jade Monroe, founder and executive director of the Ethical AI Foundation." The applause was warm but not overwhelming, exactly the tone I'd hoped for. This wasn't about celebrating me personally. It was about launching an organization that could outlast any individual personality. "Thank you all for being here," I began, looking out at faces that represented the coalition I'd been building for months. 6 months ago, I was forced to choose between loyalty to a person and loyalty to principles. Today, we're here to make sure other people facing that choice have support, resources, and community. I outlined the foundation's 3 main programs: the fellowship fund that would support students like Lisa Santos, the whistleblower protection network that would provide legal and financial assistance to people reporting corporate misconduct, and the ethical consulting service that would help companies build fair AI systems from the ground up rather than trying to fix bias after it was already baked in. The goal isn't to punish companies for past mistakes, I continued. It's to make it easier and more profitable to do the right thing than to cut corners. We want to change the incentive structure of Silicon Valley so that ethical behavior becomes good business. During the question period, a reporter from TechCrunch asked about the personal cost of my journey. "Dr. Monroe, your whistleblowing led to your divorce, the destruction of your company, and significant personal trauma. Do you ever regret the choice you made?" I thought about Ethan, who'd been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison and 5 years probation after pleading guilty to securities fraud and conspiracy charges. About the $4.2 million whistleblower award that had provided the foundation's initial funding. About the dozens of people who'd contacted me to share their own stories of workplace ethical dilemmas and found courage through our example. I regret that the choice was necessary, I said. I regret that someone I loved was capable of prioritizing profit over patient safety. But I don't regret choosing to act on my principles. That choice led directly to this moment, to this organization, to this community of people committed to building better systems. A woman in the middle of the audience raised her hand. "What's next? How do you plan to measure success?" "Success looks like stories we never hear," I replied. "It looks like AI systems that work fairly for everyone from the beginning. so there's no need for whistleblowers or investigations or public scandals. It looks like a generation of technologists who consider bias prevention as fundamental as security testing. After the formal presentation, people lingered to network, ask detailed questions about our programs, and share their own experiences with ethical challenges in tech. I moved through the crowd, listening more than talking, learning about the specific problems people faced in their daily work. Dr. Elizabeth Kumar from UCSF approached with an update on their diagnostic AI system. We've implemented the bias detection protocols your team recommended. False negative rates across demographic groups are now within acceptable statistical ranges. How many patients has that protected? Conservatively, hundreds, potentially thousands over the system's lifetime. I felt the familiar warmth that came from knowing abstract principles had translated into real-world impact. This was what justice looked like when it moved beyond punishment toward prevention. Victor Chang materialized beside me, holding a glass of the organic wine we'd served from local vineyards that paid living wages. Impressive turnout and impressive organization. You've built something substantial here. We've built something substantial. I couldn't have done this without the legal foundation you helped establish. Any word from federal prosecutors about the Helix Dynamics executives? Sentencing next month. The CEO is looking at for years. But more importantly, the company has completely restructured their AI development process and hired 3 of our consulting clients to overhaul their bias detection systems, redemption through systemic change rather than just individual punishment. Exactly. Though the individual consequences matter too. Actions have to have costs, or the incentive structure never shifts. As the evening wound down, I found myself in conversation with Sarah Kim, the former Helix Dynamics employee who'd provided additional evidence that helped secure convictions. She'd used her portion of the whistleblower settlement to start a small consulting firm focused on helping biotech companies implement ethical AI practices. I wanted to thank you, she said, not just for exposing the fraud, but for showing that there was life after whistleblowing, that you could build something positive from the wreckage. What's next for you? 3 new clients, all early stage. Biotech companies that want to build bias detection into their development process from day one. And I'm applying for one of your consulting fellowships to work with hospital systems on implementation. The revolution becomes evolution, I said. That's what sustainable change looks like. Near closing time, Cameron approached with a tablet showing our online donation page. Final count for today, 47 new monthly donors, 12 consulting inquiries, and 6 fellowship applications, plus a $50,000 anonymous donation that came in during your speech. Anonymous? The donor note just said, from someone who learned the cost of compromising principles. Want me to investigate? I thought about it, then shook my head. Some gifts don't need explanation, just gratitude. After the last volunteer had cleaned up and locked the warehouse, I drove home through Oakland and across the Bay Bridge to San Francisco. The city's skyline looked different now, not symbols of achievement or anxiety, but simply buildings where people made decisions that affected other people's lives. Some of those decisions would be ethical, some wouldn't, but now there was at least one organization dedicated to tipping the scales toward justice. My apartment felt different too. The expensive furniture from my marriage had been replaced with comfortable pieces that prioritize function over status. The walls displayed photos from foundation events, certificates from ethics organizations, and a framed copy of the first check from our whistleblower award, made out to the future we choose. I poured myself a glass of wine and called Rafi with a launch debrief. How'd it go? He asked. Better than I hoped. We registered 23 new fellowship applicants, got inquiries from 6 hospitals wanting bias audits, and connected with a dozen potential corporate partners. But how do you feel? I considered the question while looking out at the lights of San Francisco Bay. Proud, grateful, like I'm finally doing the work I was meant to do. And like Dad would approve of how we're spending his Compass inheritance. Speaking of which, any regrets about the path that got you here? I thought about Ethan in federal prison, probably counting the days until his release and planning his return to an industry that would never fully trust him again. About the marriage that had ended via text but had really died much earlier, when we'd stopped sharing the same definition of success. About the career I'd built as a corporate consultant and deliberately abandoned for something more challenging and less profitable. I regret the pain it caused, I said finally. I regret that people got hurt, that employees lost jobs, that families were disrupted. But I don't regret the choices I made once I understood what was at stake. What was at stake? Everything. The kind of person I wanted to be. The kind of world I wanted to help build. The difference between surviving and living. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began drafting the first newsletter for Foundation supporters. The subject line wrote itself: from destruction to construction, month 1 of building something better. Dear friends, 6 months ago, I discovered that my husband was helping hide algorithmic bias that could kill people. Today, we launched an organization dedicated to preventing that kind of harm before it happens. The journey between those 2 points has been challenging, expensive, and transformative. The Ethical AI Foundation exists because enough people believe that technology companies can do better than they historically have. Because enough technologists want to build systems that serve everyone, not just the people who look like them or can afford premium services. Because enough investors, journalists, and policymakers are ready to support sustainable change over comfortable status quo. This isn't just about AI ethics or corporate accountability. It's about the kind of society we choose to build with the most powerful tools humans have ever created. We can build systems that amplify existing inequalities, or we can build systems that create new opportunities for justice and fairness. The choice is ours. The work starts now. Thank you for being part of this movement, Dr. Jade Monroe, Executive Director, Ethical AI Foundation. He hit send and watched the newsletter disappear into the network of people who'd committed to building something better from the ruins of what came before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose principles over convenience, new chances to prove that ethical behavior could be both good business and good citizenship. Tonight, I was content to sit in my imperfect apartment in my imperfect city, knowing that I'd kept faith with the values my father had taught me and the compass he'd left behind. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape according to principles I'd chosen rather than pressures I'd accepted. For the first time in months, that felt like enough. It felt like everything. 1 year later, I sat in the same gleaming conference room where I'd rejected Ethan's settlement offer, but this time the purpose was different. Today, we were signing the final dissolution papers for Monroe Caldwell Consulting, officially transferring all remaining assets and intellectual property to the Ethical AI Foundation. The company that had once represented our shared dreams would become part of something larger and more meaningful. Amira sat beside me, no longer just my divorce attorney but the Foundation's general counsel and one of my closest advisors. Across the table, Ethan's new lawyer, his fourth since the investigation began, shuffled papers with the resigned efficiency of someone handling a formality rather than fighting a battle. Ethan himself looked remarkably different from the broken man I'd confronted a year ago. 6 months in federal prison followed by 6 months of community service had stripped away the artifice of expensive suits and practiced charm, revealing something more authentic underneath. He'd lost weight, grown a beard, and developed the kind of quiet focus that came from having time to think about your choices without distraction. The transfer documents are straightforward, his lawyer said. Mr. Caldwell relinquishes all claims to the Monroe Caldwell brand, client lists, proprietary methodologies, and outstanding contracts. The Foundation assumes responsibility for any remaining liabilities. There aren't any, Amira replied. We've settled the last outstanding claims and closed all pending matters. I signed my name with the Mont Blanc pen my father had given me for graduate school, the same pen I'd used to sign our original partnership agreement 7 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me, using the same tool to end something that I'd used to begin it, but with completely different intentions and a clearer understanding of what mattered. Ethan signed more slowly, his handwriting less confident than I remembered. When he finished, he looked up at me for the first time since entering the room. That's it then, he said quietly. It's officially over. The company is over, I corrected. The work continues in a different form. His lawyer began packing documents into a briefcase, but Ethan made no move to leave. Jade, could we have a moment alone? Amira started to object, but I nodded toward the door. 5 minutes after the lawyers left, we sat in silence for a moment. Two people who'd once planned to build a life together, now separated by choices that couldn't be undone. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor to ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. I've been following the Foundation's work, Ethan said finally. The fellowship program, the whistleblower protection network, the hospital partnerships. It's impressive. Thank you. I also read about the congressional testimony, the AI bias prevention bill that passed last month. That was your influence. I nodded. 3 months ago, I'd testified before a House subcommittee about algorithmic discrimination in healthcare, helping shape legislation that would require bias testing for any AI system used in medical diagnosis. The bill had passed with bipartisan support, a rare victory for ethical technology policy. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I want you to know that I understand now what you were fighting for, what I was fighting against. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our marriage but which now carried different weight. Prison gives you time to think about the choices you made, about the person you became. And what did you conclude? That I lost myself somewhere along the way. That I started believing success meant winning at any cost, instead of doing work that mattered. He looked directly at me. That I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too proud and too scared to admit I was wrong. I felt something shift in my chest, not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that the man sitting across from me was finally being honest about his failures, about their cost, about who he'd become. What are you doing now? I asked. Teaching computer science at a community college in Hayward, basic programming, digital literacy for adults who are changing careers. The pay is terrible, but he almost smiled. It feels like work your father would have approved of. The reference to my father surprised me. During our marriage, Ethan had always been respectful but slightly dismissive of my father's choice to teach at a community college instead of pursuing more prestigious academic positions. Why that job? Because I wanted to do something that helped people instead of exploiting them. Because I needed to remember why I got into technology in the first place. He paused. Because I needed to understand what you saw in that kind of work. And do you understand it? I'm beginning to. Yesterday, one of my students, a 50-year-old woman who's been cleaning offices for 20 years, successfully wrote her first program. A simple calculator, nothing fancy. But she looked at that screen with such pride, such possibility. And I realized that was worth more than any consulting fee I'd ever earned. We sat quietly for a moment, and I found myself remembering the early days of our relationship, when Ethan had talked passionately about using technology to democratize opportunity. That idealism had been real once, before it got buried under ambition and compromise. I'm glad you found your way back to that, I said honestly. I'm trying to. It's harder than I expected, rebuilding a sense of purpose after you've lost track of it completely. He hesitated. Jade, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think there's any possibility of forgiveness? Not reconciliation. I understand. That's impossible. But someday, maybe, forgiveness? I thought about the question I'd been asked dozens of times by journalists, colleagues, and friends. How do you forgive someone who betrayed not just you personally, but the principles you'd built your life around? How do you separate the person you'd loved from the actions they'd taken? How do you move forward without carrying the weight of justified anger? I think forgiveness is a process, I said finally, not a destination. It's something you work toward, not something you declare one day. What would that process look like? Continued accountability, real change, not just better public relations. And time. A lot of time. Ethan nodded, accepting the uncertainty. I understand. And I want you to know I'm not asking for forgiveness so I can feel better about myself. I'm asking because I think you deserve to be free of the anger I caused. I'm already free of it. Anger was useful for a while. It gave me energy to fight back. But building something positive requires different fuel. What kind of fuel? I thought about the foundation's work, about the fellowship students who were developing new bias detection algorithms, about the hospitals that were implementing fairer diagnostic systems, about the companies that were choosing to invest in ethical AI development because it had become good business. Hope, I said, purpose, the belief that individual choices can create systemic change, like the choice you made to report me, like dozens of choices made by hundreds of people over months and years. My choice was just one link in a longer chain. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about making my own choice, about going public with my story, the whole story, how I rationalized the corruption, how I justified the cover-ups, how I convinced myself that everyone was doing it so it must be acceptable. Why would you do that? Because maybe it would help other people recognize the warning signs before they go as far as I did. Maybe it would make it harder for companies to find consultants willing to help them hide bias. That would be meaningful, but also difficult. You'd be essentially confessing to things that weren't part of your plea agreement. I know, but I think it's necessary. Part of actually earning forgiveness instead of just asking for it. I studied his face, looking for signs of the calculation and self-interest that had defined his choices during our marriage. Instead, I saw something that looked like genuine remorse and a commitment to making amends through action rather than words. If you decide to do that, I said, you should work with journalists who understand the technical aspects of what you're describing. People who can help readers understand how these systems work and why the bias matters. Do you have recommendations? Nora Alvarez would be good. She's covered the story from the beginning, and she understands both the technical and ethical dimensions. Would you be willing to put in a word for me? I know I have no right to ask. I'll mention that you're interested in telling your story. What you say and how you say it will be up to you. Ethan nodded gratefully. Thank you for that, and for showing me what integrity looks like in practice. There was a soft knock on the door. Amir appeared in. Sorry to interrupt, but Jade, you have a call from Senator Martinez's office about the Healthcare AI Oversight Committee. I should go, I said, standing. The work continues. Ethan stood too, extending his hand. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built. Even if it came at the cost of everything we'd built together. I shook his hand, feeling the finality of the gesture. It didn't come at that cost, Ethan. It came because of it. Sometimes destruction is just construction in disguise. I hope so, for both of us. I walked out of that conference room for the last time, leaving behind not just the legal remnants of our failed marriage but the last vestiges of anger and resentment I'd carried for over a year. In the elevator, I checked my phone and found a text from Cameron, who was covering the foundation's work for her journalism program, Capstone Project. Guess what? 3 more hospitals signed up for bias audits this week. And that fellowship student from Oakland just got hired by Stanford's AI ethics lab. Your movement is working. Our movement, I texted back. This was never a solo effort. Another text. This one from Marcus Webb, with a link to a news article. Former tech executive announces plan to teach AI ethics at community colleges nationwide. The article featured a photo of a woman I didn't recognize, but whose story felt familiar, a former algorithm designer who'd left a high-paying job to develop curricula that would help working-class students understand and shape the AI systems affecting their lives. The movement was spreading, evolving, taking on forms I hadn't anticipated when I'd first sent that email to the FBI. Individual choices were becoming collective action. Personal accountability was becoming institutional change. The soil that had been me was producing a garden tended by dozens of hands. That evening, I stood on the stage at the Fillmore, delivering a keynote address to the annual conference on AI and social justice. The auditorium was packed with technologists, ethicists, policymakers, and community organizers, people who'd committed to building AI systems that served everyone rather than just those who could afford fairness. 18 months ago, I thought ethics was about individual choices made in corporate conference rooms. Today, I understand that ethics is about building systems that make the right choices easier and the wrong choices harder. I talked about the foundation's work, about the policy victories we'd helped achieve, about the students who were developing new approaches to bias detection and algorithmic fairness. But mostly, I talked about the power of collective action and the possibility of redemption through sustained effort. The question isn't whether technology will shape our future, I concluded. The question is whether we'll shape technology to reflect our values, whether we'll build systems that amplify the best of human nature or the worst, whether we'll choose justice over convenience, fairness over profit, truth over comfort. The applause was sustained and energetic, but I barely heard it. I was thinking about Ethan, probably grading computer science assignments in his small apartment in Hayward, about Cameron, interviewing whistleblowers for her journalism thesis, about the fellowship students who were designing algorithms that would protect people like their families, about the anonymous donor who'd funded our legal clinic with a note that said, "For choosing truth over loyalty." After the conference, I drove home through the Oakland Hills, taking the long way past the community college where my father had taught and where Ethan now worked. The buildings were dark at this hour, but I could imagine the classrooms where tomorrow people would learn skills that could change their lives. taught by instructors who'd chosen service over status. My apartment, still the same mission bay. Space where I'd received that devastating text message now felt like a launching pad rather than a refuge. The walls displayed photos from foundation events, certificates of recognition from civil rights organizations, and a framed copy of the congressional bill that bore the informal name the Jade Monroe Act, though I'd had nothing to do with that designation. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop to check the foundation's latest metrics. 43 fellowship students enrolled in ethical AI programs at 12 universities, 15 hospitals implementing bias detection protocols, 7 state legislators introducing bills based on our policy recommendations, 3 major tech companies hiring our consulting team to audit their existing AI systems, numbers that represented individual lives, family outcomes, community impacts. Numbers that proved individual courage could become institutional change when it was channeled through organizations designed to outlast any single person's involvement. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dr. Monroe, this is David Chen, a software engineer at Microsoft. I've been following your work and I think I've discovered bias in our hiring algorithm. Would the foundation be willing to help me report this? I'm scared, but I know it's the right thing to do. I smiled, typing back, yes, you're not alone in this. Let's set up a call tomorrow to discuss next steps. Another person choosing truth over comfort. Another link in a chain that was becoming strong enough to pull entire industries toward justice. Another seed planted in soil that had been prepared by destruction but was now producing something worth growing. The city lights sparkled outside my windows as I closed the laptop and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. New opportunities to choose principles over convenience, new chances to prove that the future didn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. Tonight, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, a woman who'd been buried and had chosen to become soil, who'd been destroyed and had chosen to become foundation, who'd been discarded and had chosen to become indispensable to a movement larger than any individual ambition. The work continued. The work would always continue. And that was enough. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.